Hi, everyone. Welcome. Thank you for joining us today. We'll get started. My name is Teresa Bowie. I'm the Climate Policy Director for Pacific Environment. And we're so pleased to team up today with Port of LA for this webinar. And here with us, we'll be joining with Walter Shen from South Coast Air Quality Management District, as well as Melissa Houchin with California Air Resources Board. And with me is Gabby Alvera, our program assistant, and supporting this webinar. For those who don't know, Pacific Environment is an environmental nonprofit dedicated to protecting communities and the environment around the Pacific Rim. We are committed to getting ships off fossil fuel as soon as possible and advocating at the local, state, and international level for policies that advance the decarbonized global shipping sector. We have a consultative status with the International Maritime Organization, and our Ports for People is our ports policy advocacy campaign, which seeks to transform ports from hotspots of fossil fuel pollution to thriving hubs of sustainable economic development and environmental protection. Our West Coast, our campaign is focused on a mandatory zero-emission pathway, as well as creating zero-emission trade routes and stopping fossil fuel buildouts. So right now, there's a growing momentum towards decarbonization and recognition on the need for ships to get off fossil fuel. The electrification for marine vessels now has been considered a proven technology contributing to a decarbonized, sustainable maritime sector. And at PE, we helped lead a coalition in support of the Harborcraft Rule in 2022. This is because in Los Angeles, Long Beach, and Oakland, hovercrafts are one of the top 3 drivers of cancer risk to frontline communities. As advocates, we know we have ambitious demands. That's why we're trying to be as solutions-oriented as much as possible by doing things like this webinar. We're open to thinking creatively with you to make this transition happen. And we recognize the importance of funding to enable the transition for zero emission, which is why we support funding opportunities at the state and federal level. At the federal level, we're supporting the International Maritime Pollution Accountability Act, which, if passed, would raise $250 billion over the next 10 years for maritime decarbonization efforts. At the state levels, we help support $60 million in California for funding for the commercial hovercraft rule implementation, and we're also working with the ports to support additional funding this year. And with that, I will pass it over to Laura Hunter with Port of LA. Just a reminder that this webinar is being recorded and we'll be sharing the slides and after this webinar. Thank you again.
Thank you so much, Teresa. I'm Laura Hunter. I'm an environmental specialist at the City of Los Angeles Harbor Department, or the Port of Los Angeles. I'm in the Environmental Management Division. Why are we talking about this topic of commercial hovercraft? Well, there are 5 targeted source categories: ocean-going vessels, hovercraft, on-road trucks, terminal equipment, and rail. And hovercraft is the 3rd largest source of particulate matter, and yet it has seen some of the smallest declines in recent years. Targeting emissions reductions from hovercraft is a critical step towards eliminating criteria pollutants, greenhouse gases, and air toxics in port-adjacent communities. We're aware that a variety of stakeholders are present here today, representing environmental justice groups, community members, vessel owners, and business owners. Many folks make a living, sometimes as a generational business, dependent on the commercial hovercraft. We're here today to help you all understand the regulations and to help you navigate the incentive opportunities, to bridge that gap between necessary reductions to environmental pollutants and the financial costs and economic impacts to your business. The California Air Resources Board, CARB, Melissa, is here to help you to better understand those regulations. South Coast Air Quality Management District, Walter, thank you. He will provide some guidance through some of the incentive opportunities that they administer. As a member of POLA's Environmental Management Division, I'm here to share some additional opportunities that are available through the Port of Los Angeles. Please note, too, that if you're not within the South Coast Air District, We encourage you to reach out to your local district's website and contact them directly. Additionally, if you're not within the Port of Los Angeles jurisdiction, we urge you to contact your local port authority. We do have people on this call from the entire state of California, so we do urge you to reach out to your local districts. We appreciate all of you taking the time to join us today. Our contact info and additional information will be available after the webinar, and will also be available after everyone completes their presentations. We will have a Q&A session, so you may ask questions of any of us that you'd like to, and we'll answer them to the best of our ability. Thank you all for being here.
Gabby, did you want to introduce?
Sure. Thank you both for that introduction. And now we will be hearing presentations, as Laura said, from our 3 different speakers. And again, we will be saving questions for the end of the webinar, but also feel free to populate questions in the Q&A tab at any time. So our first speaker will be Melissa Houchin, who is an air resources engineer with the California Air Resources Board, to give some background on the updated commercial hovercraft rule and what would be expected of operators to comply with this rule.
Hi, everyone. My name is Melissa Houchin. I'm an air resources engineer with CARB. My presentation is just going to be a high-level overview of our regulations, and then I'm happy to answer any questions afterwards. So staff has been processing annual reports that were due. Oops, I'm sorry, I'm on the wrong slide for my notes. Okay, so the recent amendments to the commercial hovercraft regulation were approved by the board at our March 24th, 2022 board hearing. The Office of Administrative Law approved the amendments on December 30th, 2022, and the first requirements went into effect on January 1st, 2023. On January 31st, 2023, CARB submitted a request to the US EPA Administrator to grant California an authorization to allow the enforcement of the 2022 regulation, and the authorization is still in progress with US EPA. CARB has had ongoing coordination with the US Coast Guard during regulation development and throughout implementation. And as required by the board, we are currently working on putting together a technical working group to analyze the advancement of zero-emission technologies and infrastructure, as well as the advancement and commercial availability of Tier 4 plus DPF technology. We will report back to the board on this topic every other year beginning in 2024. So the regulation has some zero emission requirements for some vessel categories. In 2025, new build excursion vessels must be zero emission capable hybrid, and in 2026, all short run ferries must transition to full zero emission technology. We also estimate that over 100 vessels will be operating with zero emission capability by the 2030s through the use of some alternative compliance pathways that I'll go over in a couple slides. Where zero emission is not yet feasible, the amendments require cleaner combustion standards. To achieve the greatest emission reductions and public health benefits, the regulation requires the cleanest US EPA certified engine available and a diesel particulate filter or DPF. For vessels under 600 kilowatts, if there is no Tier 4 engine available for that size and duty cycle, a Tier 3 can be used. The regulation has 2 alternative compliance options. The first is called Alternative Control of Emissions. This is a plan created by an operator that will result in equivalent emission reductions as following the model year compliance schedule outlined in the regulation. The regulation also has zero emission and advanced technology or ZET credits to incentivize the adoption of zero emission technologies. So an operator deploying a zero emission or zero emission capable hybrid vessel can receive additional compliance time for another vessel in the fleet. They'd get 3 years for deploying a zero emission capable hybrid vessel and 7 years for a full zero emission. This slide outlines the numerous compliance extensions we have available for operators. This includes extensions for infrastructure delays, technology availability, feasibility, low operational hours on vessels with clean engines, conflicting compliance dates within a fleet, or delays in manufacturing or installation of equipment. I'm happy to go over any of these extensions in more detail if anybody has questions, but for now I'm just going to keep it high level and move on. The board discussion in 2022 highlighted a need to regularly report back on technology advancement. So staff proposed a technology review to be completed every 2 years beginning in 2024, which would include the formation of a technical working group to evaluate technology. The review will cover advancement of zero-emission technologies and infrastructure, as well as the advancement and commercial availability of Tier 4 plus DPF technology. And then for some updates on implementation and enforcement, we've been processing annual reports that were due at the end of March 2023, and we're keeping an updated list on the CHC website of reported operators. And we've also been processing compliance extension applications since the regulation went into effect last year, as well as answering stakeholder questions through the Harborcraft email inbox. CARB staff also sent invoices to reported operators for compliance fees, which were due in September. And the next round of annual reports are due at the end of March this year. And the first round of opacity tests are required to be completed and the results reported to CARB by the end of March this year. The opacity testing requirement is for every other year, so the next opacity test will be due March 2026. And we've also expanded our enforcement team, and they've been conducting outreach to operators throughout the state to inform them of the regulation. And then the technical working group is planned to begin this spring, and we'll start sending out communications related to the working group in the next several weeks. So that's the end of my quick overview. I think we're going to do questions at the end, if I'm not mistaken. So with that, I'll hand it back over.
Thanks, Melissa. And yes, we will be saving all questions for the end of the webinar, but again, you can add your questions to the Q&A tab, which should be at the bottom of your screen. Our next speaker will be Walter Shen, who is the Planning and Rules Manager for the South Coast Air Quality Management District, and he will be speaking to some of the funding and incentive programs that are available to operators to comply with this updated regulation. So off to you, Walter.
Great, thank you very much. On behalf of South Coast AQMD, just thank you Pacific Environmental, Port of LA for hosting this event. Very enthusiastic, very eager to share our funding opportunities with the attendees today. First and foremost, Gabby, can you see my screen?
Yes, we can see your screen.
Great. So I'll just jump right into it. And yes, my name is Walter. I'm one of the managers here in the Technology Advancement Office. Part of my division, or what we do, is we provide incentives for off-road marine operations. And it's all fitting that I'm here to present what our agency and what the local air districts have to offer in terms of providing the incentives for the turnover of dirty or older diesel engines towards cleaner technologies. I have about 19 slides to go through. However, I want to make sure that I have everyone's attention. I'm going to breeze through it, pretty much highlighting each one of the slides, especially since these slides will be available after the session. So there are two programs I want to highlight in my presentation. The first is the CARB program, and I'm going to segue into our Volkswagen mitigation program. And just off the top, the CARB program right now, we are not accepting applications. The next time we are going to be opening solicitation and accepting applications is going to be in Q1 of 2025. Right, we just concluded the last solicitation in 2023, and I'm happy to report that we're moving forward with funding close to 200 million in eligible projects using CARB criteria and funding. So what is the CARB program? So we are now just past the 25th year of solicitation or implementation of the CARB program. It is a voluntary grant program. And as I previously touched on, it's the replacement of older heavy-duty diesel vehicles and engines to transition and accelerate towards cleaner available technologies. But the overarching goal is to reduce air pollution, to be able to have our basin meet the air toxic criteria and targets that we are obligated to do so, and to protect the public health. But the key goals, and I will highlight this theme as I talk about CARB Moyer, the key goals of Moyer is surplus emission reductions and cost effectiveness, as well as, like I said, providing the cleanest available technology. But I want to stop here at surplus emissions, because in my webinars to the public and with my workshops that we provide to the public when we do our outreach for CARB Moyer, emission reductions is early actions. The whole basis of CARB Moyer incentives is to entice, to be able to push the public to take early actions before any regulatory deadlines are met or are needed. So basically what that means is that the CARB Moyer program, they don't fund for compliance. This is an incentive program for the end user to take early action. So please keep that in the back of your mind as we move through the next slides. So here are the eligible project and requirements for CARB Moyer, especially as it pertains to commercial hovercraft projects. So commercial hovercraft, we are focusing on repowering of existing engines with new engines. However, when we open in 2025, and because of the Moyer guidelines, we will also be focusing on vessel replacements. It's a new category, a new thing, but historically, we've always been focusing on the repowering of marine engines. The new engines must be Tier 3 or cleaner, as mentioned by Melissa in the earlier presentation. It must meet a minimum of 15% NOx reduction, must operate 75% of the time in South Coast AQMD waters, as highlighted in this slide right here. The coordinates and the actual details will be available on our website, which I'll provide later. And the repower must be completed at least 1 year prior to the vessel's in-use compliance date, which I will also focus on in a later slide. So continuing with eligible projects and requirements, these are just some of the other requirements: that annual reports must be submitted, that the current vessel liability insurance must also be available. And one thing that I want to focus on is that when operators are funded with CARB Moyer funding, if there happens to be a change of ownership or whatnot, we need to be notified, because that grant funds and the funded engines, if it's transferring from one party to another, we just have to be sure that South Coast AQMD is notified of that action. So the next few slides is pretty much nitty-gritty of what I want to focus on and in terms of the commercial hovercraft regulations. Prior to the commercial hovercraft, the CHC amendments, the CARB Moyer guidelines offered project life, right, for marine vessels as long as 16 years. However, the focus on achieving and meeting our air target attainment goals, the regulations were amended to what you see here with the updated compliance deadlines. The project lives have been shortened. So why does this matter? So the award formulas in Moyer are built in with project life in mind, right? So essentially, through the calculation, and simply put, one of the factors is the longer the project life, the more annualized the emission reductions, and essentially it impacts the award amount. So if you have a longer project life, your award amount is more towards the positive, right? So in the old days of Moyer, the maximum project eligibility could be up to 16 years. But now with the amendments and with the updated Moyer guidelines, it is now reduced from 16 years to 9 years maximum project life. So you can imagine this does have an impact on award calculation. So in the next handful of slides, I'll be covering this concept. And I really want to hone in on this to have a better understanding of this impact, right? And again, with the intent that some of the marine operators keep this in mind as you are planning to apply in 2025. So in this slide, on the left are the marine vocations, from fishing vessels. I'm sorry. From fishing vessels to barges and tugboats, and to the right are the corresponding compliance deadlines based on the baseline engine model and the engine tiers. So keep this in mind as we move on. I'm going to go on to the next slide. Now, there's a lot of information on this slide. This is essentially the same slide as the previous, right? It's just more detailed. So in this slide, right? I'm going to use commercial passenger fishing vessel as an example. I understand it's hard to see and it's hard for me to kind of hone in on that. So I did try to highlight the best as I can. So for a commercial passenger fishing vessel, what you see highlighted is that if you are an operator and you have an engine that is either tier 3, tier 2, 3, or 4, depending on the engine model year, you will need to be in compliance with the tier 4 plus DPF requirement by the December 21st of that year. For example, as you see highlighted here, if you have a 2011 tier 3 engine, you will need to be in compliance by December 31st of 2027. Right, so again, keep this in mind as I move forward with the next slide. So this is what is known as an implementation chart. If you recall, I mentioned earlier that the Moyer guidelines have a maximum project life of 9 years and a minimum project life of 1 year, right? So the project life, again, this is in essence early actions as required by one of the key goals of the CARB Moyer program, right? So on the left, what you see on this slide is a tentative timeline for our next CARB Moyer program. So we will evaluate eligible projects in 2025. We will contract with eligible awardees in 2026, thereby allowing the entire 2027 calendar year to be that 1 year minimum project life as required by the CARB Moyer program. So going back to that example with commercial passenger fishing vessel, right, and the 2011 engine, right? So if you are an operator for a commercial passenger fishing vessel and you applied for Moyer funding in 2025 and you have a 2011 engine, right, we will contract with you in 2026 with the stipulation on your contract that you must complete your engine repower and be in service by the end of 2026. This will allow the entire 2027 calendar year, right, to count as that 1 year project life as required, right? So if you have a 2010 engine, you will not be eligible because your compliance deadline is December 21st of 2026. And in 2026, we're still contracting, right? So you will not have that 1 year project life as required by the Moyer guidelines. Now, conversely, if you have a 2013 engine, and you complete your engine repower in 2026, you have 2 years of project life, 2027 and 2028. Because with the 2023 engine, your compliance deadline is December 31st of 2028. I know it's a lot, but please, keep your questions with you, and I'll be more than happy to answer your questions at the Q&A session. So I'm going to move on to the next slide. So not much going on here. This is just another implementation chart, but based on the left, a chart for pilot vessels, tugboats, and push boats. And on the right is the implementation chart for barges, dredges, crew and supply vessels, and workboats. The concept is the same. It's just different locations and the different implementation charts as it impacts those different types of boats. Same thing here. I wanted to highlight this one because this is the implementation chart for commercial fishing vessels. And I'm sure there are a lot of the attendees here today that are commercial fishing operators. So I wanted to highlight what's on this slide, which is that, again, wrapping this all up, right? Project life, it impacts funding, right? So be aware of the compliance deadlines for the commercial hovercraft. And the takeaway is when we open the solicitation in 2025, please apply. Even as a commercial fishing vessel, what you see here, all the way extending out to 2030, 2031, 2032, that's a long ways away, but apply now. Because the sooner you apply, the more funding will be in your favor, if I could put it in those terms. So with that, I will move on to the next slide. So this is just a quick overview breakdown of what the funding looks like. For those who are not familiar with the Moyer program, we will fund up to 85% the cost of installation, the hardware, including the engine, the parts, so on and so forth. We will fund up to 85% for that repower project to update from a tier 0 to 3 and replacing it with a tier 4 engine and DPF, right? That new category of vessel replacement, we will also fund up to 85% for replacement costs of that, as well as the zero emission or hybrid repower projects. So I'm going to move through the next few slides. These are just our standard, and again, this is available after this workshop. But this is the next few slides just talking about our inspection requirements. So projects must be pre-inspected, right? So the old engines must be fully operational, and the engine tag preferably should indicate the make, model of the engine, the year, right? And there should be associated information on the tier, family, and serial number of the baseline or the old engine, right? There also has to be a working non-recyclable meter. That's very important. If the engine meter is not working, it's not going to be meeting a lot of the compliance as well as the guideline requirements. So please make sure it's a working resettable meter, right? So you also have to have the EPA and ARB certifications available. Moving on to the next slide. So here are some high-level information on post and destruction requirements. So in addition to verifying, our inspectors will verify the old engines as well as the new engines being installed. And finally, they will verify that the old engines have been destroyed, right? So what you see here highlighted in red is just a standard image, what an old engine being removed and an engine, a hole being bored into its engine block. Again, rendering this engine useless, right? So this follows the guideline requirements on inspections. So with that, the inspections are all required before final payment can be applied. So this is a very, very important aspect with the CARB Moyer program. So kind of covered this already, but payments will include pre, post, and destruction inspections. Invoice must also include an itemized cost for labor, parts, and engine. And I think the rest is self-explanatory. I will move on to contact information. Again, my name is Walter. If there's any questions, even after this session, please direct all questions to carlmoyer@aqmd.gov. Myself and my staff, we will monitor that email and we will reply to you as soon as we can. Now, we have a few more slides. So that concludes the CARB Moyer aspect, right? What is readily available right now for funding is the Volkswagen mitigation. So in the next few slides, I'm going to highlight the Volkswagen Mitigation Funds of California. So for those of you who are not familiar, Volkswagen was heavily penalized for using emission cheat devices. And as a result, they were a decree was passed by the courts, and the pie chart that you see on the right-hand side were the various funding that Volkswagen is supposed to provide, right? 3 districts are responsible for implementing and moving forward with implementation of these particular funds with 5 different categories, right? So South Coast AQMD, we are responsible for implementing the combustion freight and marine projects that you see in the slide before you, right? We are also responsible for implementing the zero-emission Class 8 freight and port drayage trucks. But for all intents and purposes, we're focusing on marine projects. We initially had $60 million that were assigned into our bin. Now, for those of you that's outside of our jurisdiction, just know that San Joaquin and Bay Area are also implementers of the Volkswagen mitigation funds, and they are responsible for their particular piece of the pie to implement. So, but statewide, right, South Coast is the one that's going to be carrying out implementing marine projects under the Volkswagen program. So, the current solicitation for Volkswagen for marine projects was released in June 2021. It's a first come, first serve. There's $9 million available from the initial $60 million pot. What you see in this table before you, please focus on the 3rd row, right? So unlike the CARB Moyer that is open to a lot of different vocations, the Volkswagen Mitigation Trust is only eligible for ferries, tugboats, and towboats. And the funding amount isn't 85%, as you know, I highlighted in the CARB Moyer program, but under Volkswagen, the maximum funding is up to $1 million or 40%, whichever is less. So, based upon the cost of your project, you would just do the appropriate math, right? But the next few slides, in terms of the inspections, compliance, scrapping, falls in line with what I explained program. I don't want to, be redundant and repeat the same thing, but with regards to the inspections, it is the same. It has to be pre-inspected. The engines have to be inspected for the new engines, and inspections have to be conducted for the engines that are destroyed, right? Compliance, which I cover through those the implementation chart and the table for a compliance deadline, is kind of follows the same suit in terms of when those compliance have to be met. Volkswagen, just like Carl Moyer, will not pay for compliance, right? And lastly, like I mentioned, this is a scrap and replace program. Old engines have to be scrapped. Application requirements. Right now, Volkswagen on the webpage below, highlighted in this slide, we're accepting applications right now, right? So as you apply, it's going to be an online intake process. Please have your vendor quote available, your last 12-month usage records, insurance information, supporting documentation and photos, as well as verification of your existing engine information. I'm almost done. So, okay, so contact information. So the Volkswagen mitigation is under another manager's purview, but I am wanting to give them a quick shout out just to be able to promote this program in the spirit of providing marine projects with funding. The Volkswagen staff will be monitoring their inbox, which is vwfunds@aqmd.gov. There's a direct line, Volkswagen direct line, 833-894-7267. And if there's any questions with regards to Volkswagen funding, you can always contact them, or you can also reach out to me at the Q&A session. But with that, my name is Walter, South Coast AQMD. That concludes my presentation. And with that, I'm going to pass it back to you, Gabby.
Thanks, Walter. So we'll now be moving on to our final speaker, which is Laura Hunter, who already introduced herself at the start of the webinar. Just to reiterate, Laura is an environmental specialist at the Port of Los Angeles and will be speaking to some of the port's incentive programs. So off to you, Laura.
Oh, you're on mute, Laura.
Hi, is that better? All right. So some of the funding opportunities of AQMD Carl Moyer program, which Walter spoke about, the Volkswagen ARB Environmental Mitigation Trust for California, which Walter also spoke about. Both of those are under the guidance of AQMD. I also wanted to point out that there is an EPA Clean Ports program. That solicitation has not yet opened. I'm not quite sure why. Oh, there. Excuse me. That solicitation is expected to potentially open in February of 2024. Now, it is a little bit of a different solicitation in that it is something that's done in conjunction with the port. So there again, this is something where if you're within the jurisdiction of the Port of Los Angeles or the Port of Long Beach, please reach out to us. If you're in a different Port Authority location, then please reach out to your local Port Authority. This is something that is it's a very valuable project. And what we expect to do is to submit applications for a broad range project. In particular, if you have something in mind that might be a technology advancement demonstration program, or some kind of special hybrid or zero emission vessel that you are interested in exploring, please reach out to us. It also, this project, the Clean Ports program, we're not exactly sure yet because the solicitation hasn't opened, but it does include infrastructure programs as well. There is also the EPA Diesel Emission Reduction Act, DERA, which has DERA funding programs for marine vessels. And please, I will have websites at the end of this slide deck. So please check out those websites. And again, feel free to contact us if you'd like additional information. Also wanted to highlight the POLA POLB Technology Advancement Program, or TAP program. Just to give you a little rundown on this. At the Port of Los Angeles, we have the Clean Air Action Plan. This is a joint effort between the Port of Los Angeles and the Port of Long Beach. It's aimed at reducing environmental impacts of port operations. It was created in 2006, and then it had updates in 2010 and then again in 2017. The 5 source categories that are targeted, which I did mention in the introduction: ocean-going vessels, hovercraft, on-road trucks, terminal equipment, and rail. Of course, we're focusing on hovercraft and reducing those emissions within that category. The original Clean Air Action Plan, or the CAP, was established. It created this framework for a technology advancement program, which is the TAP program. The TAP is also a joint POLA-POLB program established in 2007. It was done to encourage the development of technologies and associated infrastructure specifically for maritime-related mobile sources in and around the ports. Each of the port committed up to $1.5 million per year, just in particular for the TAP projects. And this amount has fluctuated slightly over time. Now, since 2007, the TAP has executed over 40 projects spanning test cycle development, hybrid and alternative fuel demonstrations, and early zero-emission equipment demonstrations. So generally, the thing with the TAP program is that it is encouraging technology advancement. So if there is some kind of project that you would like to explore, this is the place to do it. The TAP also can utilize stack funding. So in other words, if you have funding from another grant source, oftentimes you can stack that with additional TAP funding. And sometimes it can be worked out so that your TAP funding is covering some of your match share funding for a project with another agency's grant funds. Some of the hovercraft projects that have been funded through the Technology Advancement Program, there was a zero-emission advanced technology, or a ZEAT, tugboat, and that was done with Crowley. That is something that is in process right now, but that is moving forward, and that's quite an amazing project to have this tugboat, and I'll go into a little bit more detail. There's also a hybrid tugboat, which was done with Foss, the Carolyn Dorothy, and a Tier 4 plus DPF tugboat. It was a retrofit package with Net Technologies and Pacific Tug. If you look at the photos down in the corner of the screen where you can see Net, you can see that technology and the tugboat associated with that project. There's also a hybrid tugboat with Harley Marine, and that was also funded through the TAP. So a little bit more detail on this Crowley ZEAT tug, which I think is a really amazing project. And we look forward to seeing the results of it. The Crowley project is going to test a hybrid system for a fully electric tugboat. Power regeneration capabilities are of the propellers and the winches during tethering process repowers a 5,200 kilowatt per hour engine. Battery plug-in hybrid tug can be purely battery driven by 2 fixed propeller L-drive azimuth thrusters that are driven by permanent magnet motors. Zero-emission solar-powered opportunity chargers will charge the tugboat. And the objective of the demonstration is to achieve ZEAT certification by CARB, by the California Air Resources Board. Here is a rendering of the Zeet tug. Of course, it has not been completed yet, so this is the artist's rendering of what this tug is going to look like when it's completed. Another program that I wanted to highlight to you, and this is something that I want to specify, is a past program that was already completed, but I just wanted to give you an idea of some of the other projects that we have funded through the Port of Los Angeles and project partners. This one was done as a mitigation measure through the city of Inglewood. If any of you are familiar with the Inglewood Basketball and Entertainment Center, or IBEC, being constructed for the Los Angeles Clippers basketball team. In order to complete that construction, the city of Inglewood required them to do this mitigation measure and to reduce 60 tons of NOx and 1.5 tons of PM 2.5 emissions from the South Coast Basin and the surrounding region during the first year of construction. Based on cost effectiveness, the vessels committed to operate within the program for between 6 to 10 years on a per contract basis. And as Walter pointed out, this is done based on their cost effectiveness and how many years they would have in their contract. There was one that had a 6-year contract. Most of them wound up with 10-year contracts in order to maximize their funding amount. There were 10 vessels in the program, one ferry, a few commercial fishing vessels, a couple of sport fishing vessels, 2 tugboats, a harbor cruise, and 1 educational vessel, which was the Los Angeles Maritime Institute Lamy clipper ship, 3-masted clipper ship. That vessel, I think, is quite an interesting case study. It's done to take young people and students from around the Los Angeles area, in particular focusing on disadvantaged community members, and bringing them out on this 3-masted clipper ship to have exploration with the ocean vessel, with this wonderful clipper ship. So it's a great educational opportunity, and we were very happy to be able to clean up their engines for them and do their repower. So the Inglewood Basketball and Entertainment Center paid for 80% of the cost of the repower, and then the vessel owners had a match share of 20%. Calculated project lifetime NOx reductions, and this is with between a 6-year and a 10-year project life, based on what each vessel contracted to do. Over the lifetime of this project, the NOx reductions were calculated at 548.61 tons. The lifetime PM 2.5 reductions, 33.4 tons. It's an enormous amount of emissions reductions for 10 vessels. So I think it was an incredibly successful project. One thing that we did request of the vessel owners who participated in the program was that they put this sticker that you see down at the bottom of the screen. The cleaner engine that powers this vessel was provided by the LA Clippers. And everyone agreed to have this sticker placed on their boat. Even a couple of them who are Lakers fans. So here are a couple of the vessels, or 3 of the vessels. There was one that was a Catalina Express, Catalina Ferry. Whoops. Wait, sorry, I don't know why it keeps moving. Apologies. Another one is the Pacific Spirit, which does harbor cruises. And here is the Lamy 3-masted clipper ship. I've provided some websites and contact information I do have the AQMD Carl Moyer website, the Volkswagen Mitigation, EPA Clean Ports Initiative, the DERA grant, and a website for the TAP program with the Port of Los Angeles. I've also included my email address and contact. So thank you so much, and we look forward to all of your questions. Thank you so much for joining us.
Thanks, Laura. And then with that, we will now be transitioning to the question and answer portion of the webinar. So if you'd like to ask a question, you can raise your hand and we'll call on you and unmute you so you can ask your question. Or you could also type your question into the Q&A box. And then also as a reminder, the webinar is being recorded and we won't be taking any comments at this time. So please focus on asking any questions that you have for the speakers. Okay, Charles Myers, I will unmute you and you can ask your question. And you can unmute yourself now, Charles, if you want to ask.
Oh, sorry about that. I'm looking to see where I can get the information sent from the actual recording of this event today. Will you be sending that out via email?
Yes, we'll be emailing every attendee the presentation as well as the link to the recording.
Great, thank you so much.
While we're waiting, Gabby, do you want to read Jim's question?
Sure. So Jim Long asked if we get a replacement vessel built before the Carl Moyer period opens again, can we qualify for assistance?
So I'll take a swing at that. I just replied to Jim right now, but I would just repeat. So the Carl Moyer guidelines are written in that awardees may not take possession of new engines or new equipment without an executed contract at hand. There's other stipulations, but that's what we've been advising, right? So please do not start work. Like, for example, if you're applying for Moyer funding and then you go out and buy an engine, that transaction will be voided because that action took place before we extended the contract. So please do not purchase a vessel or do a repower work. It's not a reimbursement program per se. It's a contractual program, which means that we have to offer a contract first, you do the work, and then we reimburse you. So please be aware of that. Unfortunately, there's been a few incidents where awardees did not follow that. We were unable to reimburse them. So that's a very good question. So thanks, Jim.
Thanks, Walter. And also just as a note for everybody, our panelists have been answering questions that were put into the Q&A box throughout the webinar. So if you want to look through those, you can look through all of the answered questions that our panelists have already answered so far. Why don't we take this question from Chris Gallup in the chat. It says, what engine manufacturers can deliver an 875 HP Tier 4 engine that meet USCG reg?
I can start on that one. So off the top of my head, I don't have like a list of engines, but we should have a list of engines on the CHC website. I'll look for it in just a second. Of all of the US EPA certified engines that are available. If there are no engines available for the size and duty cycle of the engine you're trying to repower, then there are extensions available in that case.
Okay, I'll now call on Jeremiah McCauley. You can unmute yourself now to ask your question.
Hi there, thank you. This question is in regards to the opacity testing. Is there a device out there that can do wet exhaust? I know it's all set up for dry exhaust, such as tugboats and whatnot, but for a wet exhaust marine vessel, do they have that device at this time?
I know that we're working with Coast Guard and having internal discussions right now on developing an alternative testing method for wet exhaust. So I don't have an answer right now, but we will send updates whenever we can kind of hammer out a good alternative testing method for that.
So is that just, do we have to then apply for, I know that there's a due date. If our whole fleet is wet exhaust, do we just, do we have to send in a letter or anything like that?
Yeah, I would reach out to the Harborcraft inbox and just make a note of that so that we know, if we see that you didn't submit opacity test records, then we'll know why. And then and then we'll send updates on the wet exhaust procedures when we have them.
Perfect. Thank you.
Okay, Charles, I see that you have your hand raised again. I will unmute you and you can ask your question.
I apologize, that was by error.
No worries about that. I see Ed Welch also has their hand raised, so I will also give you permission to talk and you can unmute yourself to ask your question. So you can go ahead and unmute yourself, Ed, if you want to ask.
Okay, thank you. EPA hasn't acted yet on the CARB waiver application. Are the parts of the 22 amendments regarding opacity testing and reporting, are they dependent on the EPA acting on the waiver?
No, not exactly. So the amendments were approved by the Office of Administrative Law, so it is state law at this point. So we do expect operators to comply even in absence of the waiver. The waiver is more about what enforcement action we can take at this time. We do expect it to be approved. We just don't know exactly when.
I guess my question is, if you can't enforce it until you get the waiver, aren't you just asking people to act voluntarily?
Well, like I said, it is state law. So although we might not be able to take enforcement action currently, it is still a state law. And eventually we do expect the waiver to be approved.
Thank you.
I think we have Bill next. Unless-
Yeah, sorry, I was like struggling to unmute myself. Bill, I will give you permission to talk and then you can unmute yourself and ask your question. So you can go ahead, Bill. Sorry, we're having trouble hearing you. So if you want to drop your question into the Q&A, we can answer it there. So while we wait on Bill to type their question into the Q&A, I see that we also have a question from Frank in the Q&A box. And Frank asks, does California have the ability to impose more stringent emission standards than are required federally? Is that not why the waiver is being requested?
That's a good question. Probably better for are CARB legal to answer. I don't know all the ins and outs of how the waiver really works with US EPA. I know that yes, California can impose more stringent emission standards. In fact, we often do. But as far as why we have to apply for the waiver, I'm not super sure. That's mostly something our legal handles. But if you want to send that question to the Harborcraft inbox, we can get you in touch with the right people.
Okay, and then I see that Bill has typed their answer or their question into the question and answer chat. And Bill asks, once we conduct opacity testing, can we just add a line at the end of the CHC report and enter it there?
I believe there should be a reporting template specific. Yeah, I've just checked. There's a reporting template specific for opacity testing. I'll drop a link in the chat 1 second. So you should use that for opacity, and then the annual report would be separate.
Okay, I see Jeremiah has another question, so I will allow you to unmute yourself so you can ask that question. So you can go ahead, Jeremiah.
No, I'm sorry, I'll put the hand down. I didn't raise my hand again. Sorry about that.
No worries. And just as a reminder to everyone, I'll try to lower your hand after you ask a question. But yeah, if you could try to remember to lower your hand after you ask your question, that'd be great. And then Jim, I don't know if it's the same situation with you, so I'll allow you to talk, and if you already asked your question, don't worry about it.
Yeah, no, thank you. I have another question. So I did you guys change I have a research vessel, and so I had been under, well, what I had read, I thought I had to be in compliance by December 31st of 2025. And I see what you showed was 2026. But I guess what I'm trying to ask is that if I can't be in compliance by that date with Tier 4 engines, what actions, like I'm going to build a new boat, or if I'm going to get new engines or something, do I have to show intent, or do I have to apply it for a waiver until the process is complete?
It would depend on why you're unable to meet compliance. We have different compliance extensions. So if it's a technology availability issue, then we have an extension for that. If it's more about manufacturing delays, we have a different extension for that. So I will link the compliance extension fact sheet, which goes through all of them. And then if you have any questions specific to your operation or your fleet, you can send those questions to the Harborcraft inbox, and then we can just kind of work directly with you and help you figure out what's the best extension for your situation.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, and then I see we have a couple questions from Chris in the Q&A. And Chris asks what the fines are for non-compliance. And then a follow-up question or second question about where to purchase opacity testing equipment.
As far as the fees for non-compliance, there's no set amount outlined in the regulation or anything. That is something that enforcement handles on their end. So I can't give you an exact number for that. And then for the opacity testing, again, I'm not sure about like where to purchase the equipment. That's probably something that you would find more information about during the opacity testing training. So I'll link the opacity testing fact sheet as well as our list of approved vendors that perform opacity testing in the chat, and that should give you more information. And again, if you have follow-up questions, just reach out to the Harborcraft inbox and we can help you out.
Okay, I see that we've answered all of our questions. Oh, yes, go ahead, Walter.
Hey, so I wanted to follow up on a question from Juice Vonderswag. He wrote a question in the Q&A and asked about a pre-EPA vessel error. I wanted to follow up with him. I had responded to him asking him what kind of vessel it is. His question is, what is the drop dead date for repowering engines in 2026? Did I see that right? My response was, what type of engines, what type of vessel is this for? Because that would determine the compliance date and the engine model, as well as the engine model year. So for Juiced, if you want to reach out to us separately, or if you want to ask your question openly right now, I kind of want to offer and follow up with you here. Thank you.
Yes, hello. Yeah, thank you for answering my question. I'll clarify it a little bit. It's a Detroit diesel, and it's built in 1983. It's a very, very, very old engine. And from what I understand is that we have until 2026. Is that correct?
What kind of vessel? Are you a fishing vessel, a research vessel?
Research vessel, sorry.
Research vessel. So correct me if I'm wrong, Melissa, but looking at the compliance table in my slide, it says December 31st of 2026 is the compliance deadline for anything before engine model year 2007, which in this case, Juice's vessel is.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think that's correct.
All right, but there's options, right, to get an extension. For example, if you're building a emission-free vessel, is that right?
Yes. So I'm sorry if you already said this, but what engine tier is your engines?
I would say 0.
Okay. So in that case, you're gonna kind of have two compliance dates. The first is gonna be to upgrade the engine to tier 4. And so that's for any pre-tier, so tier 0 or tier 1 engines, regardless of vessel type, is gonna have a compliance date either 20, what was the model year of your engines again?
Oh, the model year of the engine, 1983.
Okay, so in that case, your compliance date would have been December 31st, 2023. And then there would be a second compliance date to add the DPF. So once you upgrade the engine to tier 4, then you would have a compliance date somewhere between 2026 and 2030, just depending on the model year of the new engine, to add the DPF. So as far as like extensions, if there are no available engines or anything, you can apply for extensions. Just reach out to the Harborcraft inbox and we'll try to work one-on-one with you.
Yep. Okay, thank you.
Okay, and then I see that Troy has a question, so I'll unmute you, Troy, and you can ask your question.
Yes, thank you. Thank you. And I'm sorry if you actually said this during the presentation. I missed a small part of it to step out. I bought a boat from Alaska that has a Tier 3 2016 engine, but it says EPA Tier 3. Does that apply in California? Just so I'm clear. And how long will I be able to use that engine as a commercial fishing vessel in California?
So is this is commercial fishing, right? Not like sport fishing. Yeah. So in that case, your compliance date would be if it's EPA tier 3, you're actually fine because the commercial fishing is the only requirements we have for them is to go to tier 3.
Okay.
So I think you're just good. And yeah, if it says EPA tier 3, then it's an EPA certified tier 3 engine, so you're fine.
Okay, thank you. That was actually my understanding. I sought out a boat with a tier 3 engine for that reason, so I'm glad that I understood it correctly. And I have a quick follow-up question, if it's okay, and I'm sorry if you covered this already, but those required green CARB signs for commercial fishing vessels, we all have to display our California Fish and Game number already, and that database is cross-linked with our NOAA documentation, and it just seems like commercial fishing boats have limited real estate to put signs up, additional numbers. Is there any chance that for fishing boats, you could cross-reference to our fishing game numbers and not require us to have additional signage?
No, at this point, it's already written in the reg, so there's really not a whole lot of flexibility there. But again, like you could just reach out to the Harborcraft inbox. We can always take another look to see if there's something. But I think we've had this question before, and I think there's not really much we can do at this point.
Okay, thank you. Thanks for your presentation and for answering my questions.
Thanks, Troy. Let's take another question from Jeremiah. I will allow you to talk and you can unmute yourself and ask your question.
Hi, I know one of the requirements for Carl Moyer funding is to basically destroy the engines after you pull them out, the tier 2s. But I'm wondering, has Carl Moyer ever considered being able to just maybe sell those outside the state to kind of wipe out all the tier 0s that are, I feel like it's prolonging the lifespan of tier 0s in South America and elsewhere, instead of being able to put that engine in good use where the rest of the world is operating, tier 0s.
Yeah, Jeremiah, thank you. That's a very common question. So the way the legislature and the statute behind the Carl Moyer program, right? There's certain things and elements in terms of implementation. And one of them is to ensure that the emission reductions are real. And what they consider quote unquote real is in fact having to destroy that old engine. We understand, I think for all practicality, it does make sense to recycle that engine, right? But to ensure that Carl Moyer remains what we consider a SIP credible program, something that the EPA recognizes to be a true scrap and replace program. That old engine has to be destroyed and has to be documented. And same thing in my presentation where I was showing the images, not only under the Carl Moyer program, but the similar kind of effort is overarching to, as you see, the Volkswagen, to our Prop 1B, to our other programs. These destructions are required for the old engines because that's the way the statute and the guidelines are written. So appreciate that. It's a very common question, but unfortunately, we have to follow the guidelines.
Gotcha.
Thanks, Jeremiah.
And then I see we have a couple of questions in the chat. The first one is, what is the deadline for complying with the new CARB sticker regulations?
Let me check really quick. Let me just pull up the right language. Okay, so the deadline for sorry, let me just checking. So I believe it is January 1st, 2024. And so you should have received your UVI number when you submitted the report, the annual report in March last year. If you don't have a CARB UVI, just reach out now. The next set of annual reports are due this March, so make sure to get that in. And yeah.
Okay, and then the next question that we have is, how long can we expect a low use exemption application to take for approval?
Good question. Right now, we're just working through applications in order of when we receive them. And so that answer is very variable depending on how many applications we have at any given moment. But if you submit one and then you're wanting an update, you can always just reach out and ask what the status is, and we can let you know if it's in progress or if we are really backlogged and haven't started it yet. It's very variable. We're getting a lot of applications right now.
Okay, does anybody have any other questions that they would like to ask?
Actually, I'd like to clarify, sorry, because I was looking for the answer for when the UVIs need to be affixed. And I thought that sounded wrong, January 1st, 2024. That's when everybody should have one. And it's March 1st, March 1st. Sorry, I'm trying to read through the reg language really quick to find. Give me a few minutes. I'll type it in the chat when I find it. Sorry about that, guys.
And while we wait for Melissa to find that information, if anybody has any other questions, please raise your hand or pop them in the Q&A box.
Yeah, it looks like we have a question from Troy.
Troy asked another question about the sticker requirement and is wondering what agency will enforce that requirement.
So that's going to be CARB enforcement. We'll start enforcing that. Obviously, with the new regulation, we're more like CARB enforcement is more interested in enforcing emissions violations. So while we do expect people to comply with every aspect of the rule, if you're having trouble, getting them printed or having some other kind of issue, the emissions violations are going to be first priority for enforcement. And I'm looking through again, and I think it is January 1st, 2024. Sorry. March 1st, 2023 would be when we started assigning them. So I was trying to read too quickly and got those dates mixed up, but it is March 1st, 2024. I mean, January 1st, 2024.
Great. And then one question from Chris. Can you direct me to where I can learn more about what happens if I exceed my low use hours?
So if you have a low use approval and your engine exceeds those low use hours, then that's going to void the low use letter and approval. And that would kind of put you back into just the regular in-use requirements. So you would need to upgrade your engine and comply using the normal pathway. So if that happens, please reach out to the Harborcraft inbox and let us know as soon as it happens so that we can mark that low use letter void on our records.
Okay, and then I see another question from Jim. Jim, I will allow you to unmute yourself so you can ask your question.
Thanks. This is about opacity. So I guess I missed the first part. So we have to have our opacity tested this year by March? If somebody has to come down to the boat?
Yeah. Yes, and so opacity test can be done by anybody certified through the CCDET training. And I think I linked that a few times in the chat, but it's also on our website. It's in the opacity testing fact sheet. There's a link to the training schedule. So anybody can take that training. Could be somebody at your company or the owner of the vessel. Anybody can do it. But we do have like a list of vendors that can also do it, and that's on our website as well. So if you didn't want to do it or go through the training or have anybody from the company do the training, you should be able to hire somebody else to do it. We have a list of people that we know of that have taken the training.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, does anybody else have any more questions?
Yeah, it looks like Chris has a question. I'm hearing that no one who took the training can actually find the equipment. Do we have time? Do we still have to comply if the equipment is not available?
That's a good question. That's the first I'm hearing of that issue. So, can you please send that to the Harborcraft inbox just so it's documented, and then I'll talk internally about that. I'll raise that issue. One of our staff has been working really closely with the opacity testing training and everything, so I'll see if he knows more about that, but that's the first I'm hearing of it.
Anyone else? I see there's one question from Larry who asks, is CARB open to new technology for measuring opacity?
Yes, especially for like the wet exhaust issue. I believe our reg language is pretty open about that. Like, we have a few different testing methods that are mentioned, but those aren't the only testing methods. I think they just have to be approved by CARB in some way. So we're always interested to hear about stuff like that if you have any ideas.
And I see in the Q&A box, James asks, with the recent CARB and CEC grant program for maritime decarbonization, would any stakeholders consider applying for a large amount of funding from the Climate Pollution Reduction Grants or Clean Ports Program to likewise benefit the maritime sector across the state or nation even? Laura, was it you who mentioned the Clean Ports Program? I don't want to put you on the spot.
No, that's fine. I was just kind of looking at the verbiage of the question as you were saying that. So yes, in fact, the Port of Los Angeles is considering putting in an application for the Clean Ports Program. So if you are in the region, please contact us. Contact me and I can help you to find the correct people to get in touch with. We are looking for some, various projects to expand within our South Coast Basin region, and additionally in collaboration with other port authorities around the state. So that is a potential.
Okay, if anybody else has any questions, we can probably take one more question before closing. And if not, we will close out. All right, I'll pass it on to Teresa to give us some closing information.
Thanks so much, Gabby. So at full implementation, the commercial hovercraft rule is estimated to reduce diesel particulate matter by 89% and NOx by 54%. These cleaner vessels will save lives, reduce cancer risk, and advance shipping decarbonization. And CARB has estimated that it will reduce or save 531 premature deaths will be avoided, $5.25 billion saved in avoided public health costs, and reducing greenhouse gas emissions by 415,000 metric tons. Since California adopted the hovercraft rule, we're also seeing Singapore adopt even more stringent requirements, setting zero new hovercraft operating in their port to be fully electric by 2030 or compatible with net zero fuels like hydrogen. And as Laura has shown, we're seeing the first zero emission tugboat at the port, and then also seeing zero emission hydrogen ferry at sea, by the sea change at the port of San Francisco. So, we partner with the Port of LA on this webinar to help you encourage to start your transition to meet the requirements of the Hovercraft rule. Thank you for all your great questions, and happy to help connect you with zero emission technology companies that we know of and support you in terms of writing recommendation letters if you're applying for state or federal grants. Again, thank you so much for joining us today, and we'll be sure to send out the presentation after the call. Thank you.
Yes, thanks everyone, and thanks to all the speakers for presenting. And in our follow-up email, we will attach all of their presentations and also a link to the recording of the webinar if you would like to view any of the presentations again or share with anyone who might be interested. Thank you, everyone, and I hope you enjoy the rest of your day.
Thank you all.
Thanks, bye.